Everybody has heard about funnel web spiders, infamous and notorious. Far fewer know of the savage predators that eat them for breakfast. And in this video, we'll be shining a long overdue spotlight upon these fearsome beasts of the night. My name is Jackson, and for years beyond count, well, not really, I know how old I am, it's just a figure of speech, I have harboured an intense fascination for the natural world. A passion kindled in childhood that time has yet to dampen. That passion, and the nerdfest of a YouTube channel it eventually gave rise to, has brought me face to face with some of Australia's most enthralling inhabitants, and taken me on all manner of adventures, some local, and others a little further afield. A couple years ago, I travelled up to Kuranda to spend a few days amid the lush tropical rainforests of far north Queensland. There I encountered a dazzling array of critters, of diversity and splendour unrivalled by anything I had yet beheld, and one particular group made for an especially noteworthy presence. Orthopterans, a widespread and abundant order of insects that includes grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids, are not the first thing that comes to mind when one envisions a fearsome hunter. To many, I would wager, these insects represent little more than a minor annoyance at worst. Perhaps a bit of a pest in the garden, or a noisy nightly ensemble that makes getting to sleep just a little more difficult than it needs to be. But among the ranks of these largely inoffensive animals are predators truly formidable, heavily armed brutes that in the insect world and beyond are a force to be reckoned with. And in the rainforests around Kuranda, one Orthopteran stood out from the rest. Juvenile, the bulldog raspy cricket. With a lethal combination of spiked limbs, the most powerful measured bite force of any insect, and a demeanour that could at its mildest be described as erratic and altogether unpredictable. Juvenile was an animal that, not long after my first encounter, promptly established a place in my mind as the only insect in Australia that I found genuinely a little intimidating. But perhaps it may soon have to share that title with one of its own distant relatives, for I am now on the tail of another wickedly armed Orthopteran, and one that I don't have to travel nearly so far to find. Anostostoma australasiae, the giant king cricket. These beastly insects are allegedly commonplace in the subtropical rainforests of South East Queensland, less than an hour's drive from Brisbane City. But finding them is not quite as simple as getting to the right areas, for the king cricket's periods of activity are limited. By day, they are denizens of the underworld, gnawing the earth beneath rock and tree where never light has shone, and one could traverse their rainforest habitats for hours on end and bear witness to not the faintest rumour of their existence. Even so, it was under the light of day that I took my first journey hence, not with any expectations of finding an Anostostoma, but for the simple purpose of scouting out and familiarising myself with the area before attempting to walk these same tracks in the pitch darkness of the night. And though the forest withholds much of its secrets during these sunlit hours, a closer look can nonetheless yield tantalizing teasers of the mystical menagerie that ventures forth ere the setting of the sun. Beneath a loose sheet of bark resides a duo of Trigoniophorus graphi, a large native slug that feeds by scraping algae off tree trunks. Suggestive as their position may be, these two are not, as one might suspect, in the midst of intimacy, for if that were the case, their positioning would look more akin to a 6-9 type situation. Nay, these two are merely resting together, though whether that followed or precedes something else remains to be seen. Nearer the forest floor, a millipede ambles about the mossy carpet at the base of a large tree. These detritivores proliferate in the moisture-laden rainforest, where they gorge themselves on the abundance of rotting logs that pile up over the decades. This green and yellow variety, abundant around this area, is currently an unknown species, yet to be scientifically named and described. Beneath a rotting log dwells a somewhat spicier customer, Hadronician fencer, a species of funnel web spider. Hadronychian fencer is the most widespread funnel web in South East Queensland, and the only one known to occur within the suburbs of Brisbane. Adults are among the largest of the funnel webs, and this juvenile still has quite a lot of growing to do. The spider was initially rather amiable, even passive, but seemingly out of nowhere flared up into a defensive pose a few moments later. The mystery of its sudden change in temperament, however, was short-lived, for it soon became apparent that the spider was being accosted by biting ants, which it unsuccessfully attempted to fend off with a level of bumbling incompetence that I can only expect from funnel webs. After a minor struggle and a few ant bites of my own, I was able to guide the spider back into the safety of its silken retreat. The Hadronychi was one of the highlights of this short preliminary venture, but of course I hadn't come to film funnel webs. I was tracking the predators that hunt them, and for that I'd have to return under the cover of darkness. But I couldn't just head out on any old night, for Anostostoma can be a trifle choosy about the weather, and may only emerge in the near aftermath of a heavy deluge. So now it was time to eagerly await the gathering of the clouds. A couple consecutive days of heavy storms was the cue I needed to return to the rainforest. After finishing work and hastily changing out of my chlorine-stained clothes, I was packed up and en route once more, this time at dusk, so that upon my arrival the veil of night would have fallen, and, with a bit of luck, the king crickets would be out and about. Contrary to what the common name of king cricket suggests, Anostostoma aren't actually crickets, instead belonging to a separate family called the Anostostomatidae, which are of closer affinity to katydids than true crickets. This family also includes the iconic weta from New Zealand. Anostostoma australasiae is the largest member of its family in the country, but the group's diversity goes well beyond this spectacular giant. Australia is home to a rich variety of these ancient insects. 13 described species from 7 different genera occur here, though it's possible, indeed plausible, that there exists a far greater number that have yet to be described. One of the few comprehensive studies on Australian anostostomatids, and my principal reference for this video, proposes that around 60 different species could be present here. Anostostomatids are largely restricted to the scattered patches of moist forest that line the continent's eastern coast. Within this range are 2 prominent hotspots: the tropical rainforests that lie between Cooktown and Townsville, and the very area to which I was journeying, the forested mountain ranges of southeast Queensland. And I was soon to see just how abundant these elusive insects can be. A nighttime foray in the rainforest is an experience most remarkable. By day, the rainforest is a barrage of visual spectacles, all jostling to seize a slice of attention, yet at the same time feels eerily quiet, even asleep. By night, nothing looks to exist save for whatever one's torchlight happens to fall upon, but the forest leaves you in no doubt that it's alive and, above all, awake. The darkness that presses in on all sides is broken by naught, save for the faint, eerie glow of luminescent fungi like these Mycena chlorophyll. But what this void lacks in sights, it makes up for in sounds. From every direction, the intermingled voices of insects, frogs, and nameless things are woven together into a chorus unbroken, with not form nor structure, yet of ethereal beauty untouched by the finest works of man. And barely 5 minutes had elapsed since I passed the eaves of the rainforest, when a faint thud, accompanied by the sight of something leaping off the footpath, caught my attention.
Okay, so it's only a few minutes into this trip, and have a look, we have already found what we're after. Okay, so we're only a few... Okay, so after that I think we might have to opt for a somewhat more boring, but I think we can all agree, safer presentation style. But anyway, this is Anostostoma australasiae, the giant king cricket. And I think we can all agree that that is a big and formidable insect. And what if I told you that this is still a juvenile? So let's see if we can find a full-sized adult. Oh goodness. Okay. I have no idea where it went. But what a cracking start.
This youngster was a promising find, a sure sign that conditions were right for the king crickets to venture out into the open. And as the hunt for an adult continued, I soon encountered other heavyweights of the undergrowth that, like the crickets, had been roused by the rains.
So the king cricket might be the target of tonight's hunt, but I had to set aside just a few moments to take a look at this. This incredible creature is what is known as Hedleyella falconeri, or commonly the giant panda snail. Now that common name might sound a little bit confusing. What could it possibly have in common with a panda? Well, aside from being slow, fat and lazy. But if you have a look around the snail's eyes, which it's very conveniently retracting as I mention them, it has these black accents around its eyes that somewhat match the black coloration around the eyes of a panda. Now, Hedleyella falconeri is the largest land-living snail in Australia. This individual is quite a typical adult size. It's not going to get too much bigger than this, but could still have a little bit of growing to do. Snails, of course, with their soft, permeable skins, are quite vulnerable to desiccation, and thus their activity is firmly at the whims of the weather. And now, on this cool, rainy night, it is prime time for these spectacular mollusks to be out and about.
Other large snails are out on the move too, like these Sphaerospira fraseri, known for the attractive banded patterning on their shells. Smaller in size, but no less intriguing, is Stanisocarion aquila, one of a group called the Helicarionids, fittingly, albeit uncreatively nicknamed the semi-slugs, due to their appearance being roughly halfway between that of a typical snail and slug. Its shell, partially embedded in flesh, provides support and protection, but is too small for the animal to fully retreat into in the manner that a more quintessential snail would be capable of. As the night went on, more and more creatures emerged, and not long after I'd bid the giant snails farewell, the hulking form of a huge insect loomed into view, right in the middle of the track.
So we saw the juvenile, and that was impressive enough. But now, take a look at this. An adult female Anostostoma australasiae in her full glory. And she, unlike the youngster, has seemed fairly cooperative so far. So let's see if we can get up close and personal without having her jump on my face. Take a look at that. That is one astonishing insect. And you might be wondering how I know that this one is female, and there's two reasons for that. First, if she cooperates, you can see sticking out of her rear end, this pointed object here, a bit like a little tail, is called an ovipositor, and that's what females use to insert their eggs into a substrate. And you can tell a little bit about her egg-laying habits based off the structure of that ovipositor. If an insect has a short and not overly well-developed ovipositor, then it's probably just going to be laying its eggs on the edge of a leaf or just stuck to the surface of a branch. But because she's got this long, robust ovipositor, that means that she's probably going to be laying her eggs deep into a substrate. And now the other way that I can tell this individual is a female is the size of her head. Males of this species are, for lack of a better word, monstrous. They have enormous heads with these really grotesquely enlarged jaws. So as imposing as this insect is, the males are an altogether more spectacular sight. And let's see if we can find one of those.
I embarked on the hunt for the king cricket, expecting to be greeted by an entity that could handily rival the bulldog raspy cricket as one of the only genuinely frightening insects in the country. But my encounter with that big female had me starting to think otherwise. Foreboding as her appearance was, there was something curious, almost endearing, about her demeanour. In a strange way, she felt somewhat like a pet. and I'll confess I found myself getting a little attached. And though I had heard from fellow invertebrate aficionados that Anostostoma were terrifying, my experience was leading me to conclude otherwise. But of course, there was yet one more thing to find before I could call the search complete. As I continued along the track, the light of my torch illuminating new sights and spectacles at every turn, several more Anostostoma, from babies to adults, were encountered. And I soon came across one that even at a glance looked markedly different from any I had yet encountered. It was then that I knew the final box had been ticked.
Well, what a night this has been. I've just released the female, and it's only maybe 5 minutes or so later. And here we have an adult male. And I don't think I even need to take it out of the box or even hold it close to the camera for you to be able to tell very clearly what's different about this one. Just look at that huge head with those enormous mandibles. And just like with the female, it's time to get up close and personal. Okay, have a look at that. Now in terms of... Whoa! Now in terms of overall size, he is actually somewhat smaller than the female, but I think that grotesque head anatomy more than makes up for it. I've got to say, intimidating as these guys are, they really are rather charismatic little fellas. Get some closer footage. It does seem to be a little bit more riled up than the... Wow! So this fellow does not seem to be quite as tolerant of my company compared to the lovely lady that we were showcasing earlier. So I think it's time to bid this spectacular insect a fond, well, fond on my end, perhaps not so much on his, farewell.
Exactly why male Anostostoma australasiae possess such disproportionately huge, protruding mandibles does not seem to be entirely clear, but there are clues that one can draw from. A feature only being present in one sex typically indicates that said feature plays a role related to reproduction, such as courtship or competing with rival males. Observations of courtship in this species are very scantily recorded, but from the information I could garner, it doesn't seem that the male's mandibles are of much relevance to the process, so it's perhaps more plausible that they are wielded in combat with other males, a phenomenon well documented in other anostostomatids like the tusked weta from New Zealand. Though noticeably more skittish and uncooperative than the female, this male was hardly something that could be described as aggressive. But does that mean Anostostoma aren't a formidable force in the undergrowth? Not at all. Anostostoma are superb hunters. Their legs, adorned with grappling spines, lock prey in a vice-like grip, while the insect's enormous mandibles smite upon it from above, turning it into a pulpy, dismembered mess on the ground in a matter of seconds. And when I mentioned that king crickets can take down funnel web spiders, that was no statement of mere speculation. This image, courtesy of the Australian Museum, shows one in the act of consuming one of these deadly arachnids. And what's more, the cricket in the picture appears to still be a juvenile. So while Anostostoma may to us humans be skittish at worst and basically a spiky hamster at best, if you're Australia's deadliest spider, this leering face could be the last thing you ever see. But Anostostoma aren't solely predators. Indeed, they are about as opportunistic as animals come, with a broad menu comprising all manner of fruits, nuts, foliage, and perhaps even fungi. It seems that if you're going to be the bruiser of the insect world, a balanced diet is essential. And that wicked armature is useful not only for tackling prey, it makes for a very steadfast defense. The king cricket's spiked limbs and massive jaws can be a fierce deterrent for many would-be predators, and the hind legs can both deliver a powerful kick or launch the insect well clear of its attacker. To warn potential predators that they're more trouble than they're worth, Anostostoma can create a hissing or buzzing noise by rubbing their abdomen against their hind legs. If exceedingly stressed, Anostostoma australasiae has one final line of defense that I myself have yet to witness. Here the cricket will flip onto its back, legs splayed, mandibles agape, and showing off bright colours on its underside. Though it may be without motion in this pose, the insect is far from idle. On the contrary, it's highly alert, primed to close its spiked legs and mandibles around anything that touches it, delivering the combined payload of a thorny embrace and a bite well worthy of remembrance. The appearance of anostostomatids is, one could say, rather stereotypically prehistoric, and in this case their primal visage is more than skin deep. For the Anostostomatidae are quite an ancient family of insects, and a major clue to the group's potential origin lies in their distribution across the globe. Members of the Anostostomatidae occur not only here in Australia, but India, Africa, Madagascar, and South America. That's a very broad distribution, but there's a notable trend. All of these landmasses were once part of the supercontinent Gondwana, which last existed in its entirety in the early stages of the Jurassic period. Given their near-exclusive occurrence on Gondwanan landmasses, it's reasonable to infer that the Anostostomatids were of Gondwanan origin, and thus evolved prior to the supercontinent's breakup in the early Jurassic. And as the landmasses progressively separated, they each took their resident Anostostomatids with them. However, their additional presence in places like New Zealand, which had been entirely underwater until long after the breakup of Gondwana, would suggest that the Anostostomatids continued to spread their distribution in more recent times as well. The quest to behold Anostostoma australasiae in the wild was truly a most worthwhile adventure, not only for the incredible experience of getting up close and personal with these dinosaurian insects, but all the other memorable encounters with creatures weird and wonderful along the way. If you'd like to learn about another Australian native that also led me on a grand adventure just to see one in the flesh, then feel free to check out this video about the red triangle slug. And if you enjoy my content, then you are welcome to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on my next adventure.